Hello, and welcome to video 4 of our series on the Local School Wellness Policy Triennial Assessment for Connecticut School Meal Sponsors. This video will cover identifying connections between policy and practice. This video was developed in a collaboration between the Connecticut State Department of Education and the University of Connecticut's Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity. The third step of this process is identifying connections between policy and practice. This step documents your progress towards meeting your policy goals. In this step, you will compare your WellSat 3.0 and WellSat I scores. Then you will use these scores to identify areas where your schools have strong policies and aligned practices, need to create a plan to implement practices that are required in your policies, need to update policies, or have opportunities for growth. First, let's talk about what we found nationally about how wellness policies and practices are related. A few years back, the Rudd Center collaborated on a national study that looked at wellness policies and practices in California, Connecticut, Kentucky, Minnesota, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, South Dakota, and West Virginia. We studied 41 school districts and 94 schools, including elementary, middle, and high schools. We used the WellSat, which you completed in Step 1, and the WellSat I, which you completed in Step 2. We hypothesized that practices that were written into the wellness policy would be more likely to be implemented than practices that did not appear in the policy. This chart shows how we expected scores to be distributed. We expected that when you took the average of each of the WellSat policy scores for a school, then compared them to the average of each of their WellSat I practice scores, we would see a neat line like this, that schools with weak policy scores would have weak practice implementation scores, and those with strong policy scores would have strong practice implementation scores. However, this is what we actually found. The scores looked nothing like we expected them to look, so we had to figure out how to think about what this means. The way that we found to think about this is how you will organize what you found in your own schools. Let's take a look. We realized that we could break this chart down into 4 quadrants, and each of those quadrants tells us a different story. The first section is on the upper right of the chart. This is where you have strong policy scores, so the WellSat scores are between a 1 and a 2, and you have full implementation, so the WellSat I scores are also between a 1 and a 2. So each of these dots represents a policy, and we use a star as the icon for this section to recognize that these are areas where districts are doing a great job with their policies and a great job implementing their corresponding practices. The second section is in the lower right. This section is where policies are strong, but they aren't being put into practice. They are written, but not implemented. As you can see, there were hardly any policies in this section. The icon for this section is a group of hands coming together to symbolize that schools with policies in this section need to get together and create an implementation plan. The third section is in the upper left, where most of the dots are. These are items where a practice is implemented, but it is not written into policy. We use a notebook and pen as the icon for this section, as districts can write policies to back up these practices. And the last section is in the lower left. These are areas that are off the radar for districts. They are not in the policy, nor is the district implementing them. Just like the bottom right section, there are very few dots in this section as well. We represent this section with a chart icon, showing that these are areas where there is room for growth if districts wish to improve their wellness policies and practices. So now that we've looked at those 4 sections, we're going to use them to categorize your WellSat and WellSat I scores. This will show where your policies align with your practices, where they don't align, and where there is room for improvement. Pull out your WellSat and WellSat I scorecards, and let's start to identify where some of the items are categorized in your schools. This table gives an overview of the 4 categories. After this quick explanation, we will walk through the process of identifying your district's findings one category at a time. First, we'll look for strong policies and aligned practices. Any items where you have a score of 2 for both your WellSat policy score and your WellSat I practice score will fall in this category. Next, we'll identify items where your policy score is a 1 and your practice score is a 0, or where your policy score is a 2 and your practice score is either a 1 or a 0. Those items are in the Create a Practice Implementation Plan section. Next, we'll find any items where your policy score is a 0 or a 1 and your practice score is a 2. Those items are in the Update Policies category. Finally, we'll find any items where your policy score is a 0 and your practice score is a 0 or a 1, or where your practice and policy scores are both 1s. Those items are in the Opportunities for Growth category. We have created a worksheet to help you keep track of how your policies and practices align. This is Worksheet 3, and you can see the first page here. You will need to publicly post sections 1 and 2 of this worksheet, the strong policies and aligned practices, and the areas where you need to create an implementation plan. You will also need to publicly share any federally required items that are in sections 3 and 4. The rest of sections 3 and 4 can be posted publicly if you want, but should at least be kept for your next administrative review, even if you do not post them to the public. Now let's turn to section 1 of Worksheet 3. This page is organized by the sections of the WellSat so that you can keep all of the items organized. Within each section, you should list the federally required items first, then the other items. If you need more space in any section, you can add rows to the chart in the document. This is where you will record any items where you have a policy score of 2 and an interview or practice score of a 2. For example, if you scored a 2 in your policy for the item SM1, and when you conducted your interview, you also scored a 2 for the implementation of the practice, that item would be listed here. Now record the item number and item description for all items where you have a policy score of 2 and an interview score of 2. Pause the video while you complete this section, then come back and resume the video when you are ready. Let's move on to section 2 of Worksheet 3. Again, list the federally required items first, as you need to develop a plan to implement those items as part of the triennial review. Record the item number and description for all items where your policy score is higher than your interview or practice score. So, any items where your policy score is a 1 and your practice score is a 0, or where your policy score is a 2 and your practice score is a 1 or a 0. For example, if you scored a 2 in your policy for the item NE6, and when you conducted your interview, you scored a 1 or a 0 for the implementation of the practice, that item should be listed here. Again, pause the video now, record your answers, and resume the video when you are ready. Now let's complete section 3 of Worksheet 3. This will likely be your longest list, as this is the category of items where practices are stronger than the policies that are in place. Again, prioritize any federally required items on this list, as you need to update your policies relating to these items as part of the triennial review. Record the item number and description for all items where you have a policy score of a 0 or a 1 and your practice score is a 2. For example, if you scored a 1 in your policy for the item PEPA7, and when you conducted your interview, you scored a 2 for the implementation of that practice, that item should be listed here. If you also scored a 0 in your policy for the item WPM7 and scored a 2 for the implementation of the practice, that item should be listed here, and you should note that it is a federal requirement, so your district will need to take steps to add this to your wellness policy. This item will need to be reported publicly along with sections 1 and 2. Pause the video now, record your answers, and resume the video when you are ready. Finally, let's finish section 4 of Worksheet 3. Here, you will record any items where your policies and practices are both limited. Record any items where your policy score is a 0 and your practice score is a 0 or a 1, or where your practice and policy scores are both 1s. For example, if you scored a 0 in your policy for the item NS10, and when you conducted your interview, you scored a 0 for the implementation of the practice, that item should be listed here. Again, please prioritize any federally required items on this list, as you will need to address them. For example, if you also scored a 1 in your policy for the item IEC7 and scored a 1 for the implementation of the practice, then that item should be listed here And you should note that it is a federal requirement, so your district will need to take steps to add this to your wellness policy and practices. This item will need to be reported publicly along with sections 1 and 2. Pause the video now, record your answers, and resume the video when you are ready. Congratulations! You have completed all of Worksheet 3. This concludes Video 4, Identifying Connections Between Policy and Practice. The final video will address how you should summarize and share your findings. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us.